And Jonathan will say goodbye to you as we transition to our tribute to Richard Meislin, a pioneering web journalist at the New York Times who died just this week at the age of 68. And we are honored to be able to do this tribute to Rich. And we're going to be joined by Tom Bodkin, Chief Creative Officer of the New York Times, and Carla Baranauckas, former Deputy National Copy Chief of the Times, who is going to come on now and talk about Rich. And there's Tom as well. Thank you both for being here. And I'm sorry, Tom, we're meeting under these circumstances, but I'm glad that we're able to pay tribute at this moment.
Thank you, Sri.
Carla, over to you.
Thank you, Sri. So thank you, Tom, for joining us. And first, before we get started, I just wanted to ask you how you've been managing over the last year and a half with the pandemic.
Oh, thank you so much. I've been fine. I'm very lucky to be in a situation where coping with the pandemic is easier. As you can see, I'm in the country right now. I have a house in the Catskills, so I've been luckier than many others. Thank you.
Okay, thank you for that. And then first, before we get into Rich, your title is Chief Creative Officer at the New York Times, and I think you have a couple of other titles too. But could you just explain what it is that you do?
Sure. Really, my sort of more meaningful title is Design Director, and I've been Design Director of the Times since, I guess, 1987, well before the digital era. And in that role, I oversee all of the design of both the newspaper and our digital products. It's primarily about the visual presentation of the news throughout our products.
And throughout the years, you've worked very closely with Rich Meislin on a number of things. Not every New York Times employee gets an obituary in the paper. So what is it about Rich and his work that elevated him to someone who deserved an obituary?
He was really an extraordinary journalist in the sense that his breadth of skill and interests were really ranged far and wide. I've been working in journalism for 40 years. I know journalists well, and I know the New York Times journalists very well. And usually they're very kind of very focused on one thing, and that is certainly historically traditional journalism, writing, editing, reporting. And Rich was actually an excellent traditional journalist. He was a reporter, a writer, and an editor, and was excellent at that. But he also had, from days well before, we became enlightened. He was interested very much in technology, and from a young age, he was interested in technology, and then used that to push the New York Times, which is, not surprisingly, a very traditional organization. Really help them move into the digital era, which is, quite different from traditional journalism. He was truly a pioneer.
Tom, both you and Rich come from a very innovative point of view. You have, taken the Times, both print and online, through many improvements and design changes. You were there for bringing color photographs into the paper, which at the time was shocking. People were upset and worried that color would somehow change the New York Times for the worse. So how did you, and Rich, bringing along a lot of the digital things, but he also innovated, I believe, on the graphics desk as well, and some other places. And
yes,
so
that's when I first, met Rich, because as the design director, graphics was very fledgling then. This is 1987, and it was actually sort of not even really a formal department, and it became part of the art department, and I was one of Rich's many bosses, and he was the first graphics editor really at the New York Times, the first formal graphics editor at the New York Times. So he was very involved in the visualization of data, and as was I. Overseeing that department, but certainly not to the depth of Rich. But I think Rich was also always interested in design and graphic design specifically. And I think we both shared a lot of interests that went beyond traditional journalism. He was just very open-minded and curious. And he understood at a very early stage the importance of digital media in a way that the rest of the newsroom really didn't. As I said, it's a very traditional organization. Sort of the digital media in its early days, 1990s, was sort of met with, either indifference, ignorance, or skepticism. And then as it evolved, there was a good deal of fear about it. Rich from the very beginning understood and I think saw the future of its importance and role in communications in a way that others didn't.
Oh, go ahead.
Yeah, no, it was, others didn't in the newsroom, and it was mostly there was, kind of either, as I said, indifference or resistance. And he pushed back on that.
and the resistance is very strong at the Times because it is a very traditional organization. As I recall, people used to say that getting the Times to change is like getting a battleship or an aircraft carrier to turn around.
That's right. It's just, you brought up color, which is in a way an interesting kind of analog. Color was a new technology in a sense. And actually it was a quite common technology at the point at which we introduced color. We were one of the few newspapers at that point that were solely black and white. Everybody else has switched to color, and obviously magazines were in color, and people used to. Color TV had been around for 30 years. And it was, as you said, it was very much resisted and feared. And I actually had to spend a good deal of energy convincing people, I'm sorry, that color would not, distort our values. And in a way, digital was met with that same sort of, resistance to change.
I believe we have a comment from John Schwartz about the switch to color and one role that Rich played in that. Do we have that we could put on the screen? Maybe we do, maybe we don't. Anyway, the gist of John's comment was that there were some software salesmen talking about how you could get this expensive software to make sure that what you saw on the computer screen was what came out in the newspaper, and that Rich looked at it and said, wait a minute, the human eye can do that way better than software can, and saved the Times a lot of money in that process.
Yeah, Rich was real. Another kind of special quality of Rich is that he was super smart, a really good journalist, but he's also very practical. And very sort of human base, and also even before people talked about user experience, which is now a very common term, Rich was very conscious of that, as many designers are. He shared a lot of the qualities of a good designer in the sense that he was sort of tuned into what normal people want and perceive, and that also made him an even better journalist. He also brought to the New York Times not just advances to journalism in the way we communicate, but very significant internal advances in terms of how we actually work with each other internally and use technology. We were again a little bit behind in those areas. This is a 150-year-old organization or even longer that for most of its history produced, this one print product. And Rich, helped modernize that product and bring our content to digital media. But he also enhanced the tools we used internally and pushed for those.
We've got this slide showing a picture of Rich in his younger days. In the era when I knew him, he did not have hair on the top of his head like he has a beautiful mane here. But this comment came in from Charles Kaiser. Richard John Meislin, my beautiful friend of 47 years, extraordinary husband of Hendrik Utendahl, youngest Albany bureau chief, magnificent foreign correspondent, father of the New York Times Online, mentor to generations of grateful Times journalists, loyal son and devoted brother, died with dreadful speed Friday morning at Memorial Sloan Kettering at the age of 68 after a short, brutal battle with Merkel cell carcinoma. He enriched the lives of everyone who knew him in 1,000 ways, from saving everyone from computer hell to producing feats from his kitchens in Manhattan and the Catskills. Joe and I cannot imagine our lives without him. Rich and I and Paul Goldberger and David Dunlap and Steve Ratner were our own Times mob in the 70s. When he was president of the Harvard Crimson, he was known as Super Meislin. In the Times newsroom for many decades, he was the one person from whom you could always get both truth and affection. Now Rich gets the greatest privilege any Timesman can aspire to, a beautiful obituary from the incomparable Mr. David W. Dunlap.
Well, that's wonderful, Charles. Thank you.
Yeah. The as innovators and agents of change, there must have been times when you and Rich didn't necessarily see things exactly the same way. What was it like to work through things with him? He struck me as being very professional all the time.
Oh, no, he certainly was. And actually, as you asked that question, I'm kind of trying to think back. I'm sure we had some probably minor disagreements because we actually thought very much alike. And I think, I learned a lot from Rich, a lot. Technically, he was much further advanced than I was. I hope he learned a lot about design from me. But we shared a lot in the terms of aesthetics and the way we just thought about the world. And he was quite professional. He was also, I just want to add, a super nice guy. You've got a little sense of that from Charles's comment, who was a good friend of his, and I, began with a professional relationship with Rich, but it grew into a very close friendship. And he was, a particularly warm, empathetic person, and that meant, disagreements were not a big problem. He was open-minded. And you're right, he was very professional, and he was smart. He was usually right.
The thing I remember about him is he was super smart. He was way ahead of his time on so many things, and yet he was, as you said, he was super nice, had a great sense of humor, and he was one of the few people in the newsroom who actually had a twinkle in his eye. I mean, he seemed to be able to put things into the proper perspective.
Very much so. He was a really well-balanced human being, and he brought that to his professional life also.
One of the innovations that he did was the cooking section online, which now has the archive of all the recipes. And I came across a tweet that he did, which was years ago. Once this archive had finally gone up, and he was saying in the tweet that it had only taken him 30 years and X number of months to get the cooking archive started. and then he said, just wait till you see what I'm going to get done in 2034. So we've really lost somebody who was a true visionary.
Yeah. And so I want to thank Carl Lavin, who just made a comment. Thank you, Carl.
And part of the thing about the Times is that it is a place where there are a lot of smart people in the place. There are a lot there's a lot of important work going on. People are under a lot of stress, and it did seem that Rich was one of those people who could lighten the stress a little bit without giving any any slack in terms of striving for excellence. But he somehow knew how to lighten the load a little bit.
Yeah, the Times does attract very, very smart people, not surprisingly. And some of them are quite arrogant. And Rich didn't suffer from arrogance. He was smarter than any of them, but he was also modest and was a good listener, and knew what he didn't know, which is also a welcome trait.
He also seemed to mentor a lot of young people. And when I was at the Times, I left in 2009, but when I was at the Times and first came in, the idea of experience and number of years in the place meant a lot to people. And it was hard for younger people to, have a strong voice. But Rich mentored a lot of people. And it occurs to me that Charles Blow was in the graphics department with Rich. And then, of course, Rich mentored a lot of young people at New York Times Digital.
No, very much so. He was just very generous as a person and as a colleague. Very generous.
Right. Well, I really appreciate you on short notice giving us the time here today. And we're going to have a few announcements, and then we have a little video that shows some tweets of what people said about him. But before we go to our final announcements, is there anything you'd like to say just to kind of sum up about Rich?
Sure. I mean, I think he really was an extraordinary person in so many different ways, and I'm very grateful to have known him, and I thank you for allowing me to be a part of this tribute. He was, just really unique. Thank you so much.
I agree 100%. Thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you, Carla, for leading us in that tribute to Rich, and want to make sure that we acknowledge some of the comments that came in. Tom referenced the one from Carl Lavin. Great to see Tom Bodkin talking with Carla about Rich Meislin's endless curiosity and pioneering vision. Tom himself was innovated in print and online, keeping top design in the forefront. We also had a comment from Amy Reinhardt, who is a former guest of the show, talking about the early days of the New York Times and the web. In her words, not a lot of grown-ups took us seriously. Rich was one of those people who believed in the web, was here to stay, and had a real vision for how to develop the New York Times voice online. It's wonderful to have his presence. Bernie and Carla B were North Stars as well. Carla, thank you for arranging to have Amy on the show earlier. Liz Pressman also said that Rich designed the digital archives. As a former New York Times librarian, she is very grateful. And several other. Tara Parker Pope is watching as well. She commented on Twitter earlier, making reference to truth and affection. So thank you so much. Tom, really appreciate you joining us for this tribute. It really means a lot. And Rich's legacy certainly is felt and appreciated. So thank you for taking the time this morning.
Thank you.
So we're going to just move on to a few quick announcements. Tom, if you have a few minutes to hang out with us for a little bit, we'd like you to see that video tribute that we put together. So with that, we want to thank you again for joining us. We had Ellen said that was a lovely tribute. Thank you, Ellen. Miriam Berkeley is so glad to hear about Rich Meislin. Patricia Freudenberg says thank you as well. And what we'd like to do is to close with a compilation of, and Diana said, awesome team effort. Another great show. Thank you, Diana. We had a lot of great comments about our segment with Jonathan Borstein as well. And Jonathan, my apologies. I made it a point to get the correct pronunciation, and I mispronounced it myself. So please forgive me. Chitachi said it was a fascinating conversation. So we'd like to end with that tribute, as I mentioned. We collected some of the tweets that were sent out about Rich, and we want to share that with you as we end today's show. Thank you, Ralph Blumenthal, for watching, another former guest, and Rahadian saying thank you, everyone, for a great show. So here is that tribute. Thank you.